listened to him and I built a rapport with him where he said he had other investors. He had probably 12 other offers from other investors that they didn't listen. They just kind of beat him up. So I understood what his problem was and solved it. So whenever I look at a deal, there's two things I always want to know. Why are they selling and what are they planning on doing with that capital? Because if you can figure that out, that's how you can be creative enough to structure a seller financing deal.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Trust This, the podcast for real estate entrepreneurs in Florida. Today, I have a wonderful guest, Mark Monroe. Mark lives in Boca Raton, Florida. He's the host of Real Estate Power Play, the podcast for real estate investors. He's also an Amazon best-selling author of Creative Real Estate Investing, How to Buy Real Estate with No Money and No Credit. And he's also a mentor and coach to real estate investors across the country. He's got tons and tons of followers around the country who follow his advice. And Mark, I'd just like to welcome you in today to Trust This.
Oh, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm excited. We've been following you for quite some time. We're in the same world, and last time we jumped on a phone call, it was really refreshing of speaking with somebody at a level that kind of understands a lot of it. So, engaging at a high level, if that makes sense, when it comes to the whole creative real estate world, finance, land trust, and the whole entire process of it. So, really enjoy that.
Yeah, I did too. And one of the things that came out of that was, while I'm primarily focused on Florida, you are nationwide. And, at 24, you told me you left real estate and banking and investing and got into to real estate investing. What motivated that and what initial experience shaped your career as to why you did that?
Well, what happened was a lot of my clients were investors and I became friends with them. And then I just saw the type of numbers that these guys were making. I was doing their finances. As I said, I had a real estate banking firm up in the Washington, D.C. area with 107 loan officers. And I was starting to see these financials coming in of these people that had tons and tons of real estate. And I'm like, all right, how are you guys doing this? And then I'm learning, saw some of them doing it a little creatively. And then I started putting my real estate banking background, mortgage banking side of it, and then started seeing how all this stuff can kind of work. And I originally started out doing what was called the sandwich lease options back in the day, and then I evolved into doing these other type of strategies. But I've been doing the land trust stuff. I don't even remember how long ago I started. It was in the 90s. Starting to use the land trust strategies and helping them out, and kind of just kept things. And it's evolved. The regulations and everything kind of evolved over the years, and which, it's part of the game.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think staying on top of the regulations is a big part of it for any industry. And if you're going to be serious about anything you do, you got to stay tuned in to news and podcasts and information that's coming out about what's going on in your industry, because regulations can change from year to year, and what you were doing last year may not be allowed this year. And a lot of people don't pay attention to that.
And make sure you're getting your information from reliable sources, because there's a lot of misinformation out there that's floating around, a lot of it.
Yeah, I run into that. Just lawyers. I mean, they're lawyers, sure, and they do what I do, but they're based in other states, and they're out there talking like, well, this is how it goes, how it happens in every single state in the country. And I'm sitting there screaming at the top of my lungs, going, no, no, no. In Florida, we do it this way. And in North Carolina, you do it that way. In South Carolina, this way. And in Texas, that way. And a lot of people just don't think it. Real estate regulations and rules are extremely different from state to state. So getting with the right person in those states is the thing you got to do. But for you've done it nationwide, so you've probably gotten a big breadth of knowledge of how different things work in various states. How do you keep up with all that?
It's challenging. You need to rely on people that knows the regulations in that state. Well, you hope they know. I did something one time many years ago. I went into a state using a wrong type of contract and the language, and I went in there and I thought everything was good, no issues. And then what happened was my contract got ripped apart when I had to go to evict somebody because I was using the wrong type of agreement language in the contract, and everybody was just looking at me like, what is this language? What is all this?" And everybody was just like, so make sure whatever you're doing when you're doing business in the state, always, over the years, I've built up a really good referral network, and it's easier nowadays. But back then, it was hard. You had the internet, but it wasn't like resourceful how it is today.
Right, right. You can get so much information out there. And I think that's part of it too. And I've said this before, people don't pay for information anymore because you can get information for free. What people pay for is application. And whether it's a lawyer, a consultant, bankers, financial folks, whatever it is, you're paying for them to apply the information that they know to your facts, to your situation. And so many, and yeah, you pay for that, but that little bit you pay should make you a lot more money than you'll ever lose over
Yeah.
time.
Well, what
You
happened to
mentioned,
me on this example way back in the day, I want to save $1,000, so I'm just going to use my own contract instead of using the one having an attorney in that state, and it cost me $47,000 instead.
oh yeah, no,
So you
I
live and
had
learn.
I had a Texas contract come across my desk the other day, and it was I was representing the seller here in Florida, and a wholesaler out of Texas had just sent their Texas wholesale contract in, and my seller wanted to get out of it. He wanted out of the contract because he'd gotten a better offer from someone else, and he's like, this and that. So I looked at their contract and I'm going, yeah, this is unconscionable in Florida. You can't do this in Florida. You can't. So I just sent them a letter saying you can't do X, Y, and Z. Plus, they had the wrong property in their contract, but it actually worked out for the best because then they came back and said, okay, how about this? We'll use the Florida contract, your Florida contract, and we will pay. Is he willing to do it if we pay him the same amount, but we buy the property that he thought he was selling us because he owned three properties, and they put in an offer, and he thought based on their offer they were offering on his cheapest property rather than his middle property, and we ended up working it out just fine. But because they had used a Texas contract in Florida that was totally unconscionable, I was able to go, yeah, you can't do all this, and got them to back down. But at least we got the deal still worked out there, like that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Now, so you deal with a lot of creative financing. I heard you say sandwich leases in there. I know what those are. A lot of people don't. Why don't you explain that first? Because since that was sort of your entree into creative financing and getting creative deals, explain what
Well,
sandwich lease.
I think it's a great strategy for people getting into the creative real estate world because it's less risk. There is still risk involved, but if you don't have a lot of capital, a lot of times people are coming into this world nowadays and doing these deals, and they're just locking them up and doing wholesaling on these creative financing deals, and it's very, very dangerous doing that because if you put in your end buyer, I mean, there's so many different things that could go wrong, but a lot of people don't even know about the consumer protection regulations when they put that end buyer into their property, and the investor's like, well, my hands are free. It's the seller's responsibility. You're the one that structured it, so keep that in mind if you're the investor. But what happened was back in when I started doing my first deals, I really did a lot back in 1997 doing the sandwich lease options because the market was kind of like where it is today. But we had a lot of inventory. Today we don't have much inventory. But back in the interest rates jumped up to like 7.75, and homes are sitting on the market for 3, 6, 7, 8 months at a time, and people couldn't sell their homes. So I said, hey, would you be willing to rent the property to me for a few years? And I close on it. I'll take care of the maintenance repairs. And they're like, oh, I need my capital out of my property to go buy this next one. Well, my background is real estate banking. I said, okay, this is what I'll do. I'll refinance your property at 80% loan to value, give that cash so you can go buy it. And then I'll do like a 5-1 arm. Back then it was popular, the arms. Nowadays they're not very popular, but because the rates were at 7.75, I could get a rate around like 5.25 fixed for a couple years, for 2 years, and then it'll adjust. And then I'm like, oh, by the way, Mr. Seller, your new home, I want to do that loan. So I make money off the refinance, I make money off the new loan, and then I would put a tenant buyer into the property, and they would put an option fee down. An option fee is like a down payment; it's non-refundable. So off of one lead, I was making roughly about $35,000 on the front end on that. So that's how I originally started back in the day doing that thing. Nowadays, I don't recommend doing it because it's a little bit of little bit of conflict of interest back, nowadays trying to do that. But back then it was great. I was upfront with everybody, told the seller exactly what I'm doing, putting an end buyer because I knew what I to put the end buyer into that property. I knew what the qualifications were going to have to be for them to be able to get the financing in 2 to 3 years on that property. So that's how I originally started out doing it. And I got into these with no money down because the seller was getting that cash and he thought that was, some of the, was getting that cash that they needed. So I went 45 days without having to make a payment. And so that's kind of so you're going under a lease agreement with the seller, allowing you to sublet it. And you can do it for Airbnb, tenant, end buyer in the property, wherever you may be. So,
Yeah, yeah. I used to do a lot of sandwich lease options. I haven't had many in, gosh, yeah, years. I guess because of that, and it is really everything's more regulated since the financial crisis of 2008 through 2012. There's a lot more regulation around everything.
exactly.
But you wrote the book, Creative Real Estate Investing, and you emphasize purchasing properties with little money or no money, no credit. So, what are some of the biggest points out of that book? What are some of your biggest tactics and strategies out of that book that people have found most useful?
I would say the number one thing where people really go wrong, and they don't go wrong, but when you're doing a seller financing strategy, and when you're sitting there and you're talking to a seller, you have to look at it like this. It's like a marriage. You're going to be in a contract with these people. You're in a long-term commitment. So the first time when you're talking to these people, you have to think about it, your spouse, when you first went on that date with your spouse. You guys got to know each other. And that's really what it comes down to. 80% of my conversation is just building rapport and getting to know them. I'll give you a quick example. One of my students slash members in my program had this one gentleman in Georgia, and he was open to seller financing. He only wanted I don't know where in Georgia, I can't remember where it was, but he only wanted $128,000 for this home, but he wanted $30,000 down. It did not make sense putting $30,000 down on a $120,000 home. However, I still got on the phone. I had on the phone, and my mentor was on there, my mentee, and then I started talking to the seller. I got to know like his most important thing at this stage in his life was his dog. I got to know the breed of his dog. Got to know he had 5 children. He has grandkids. I found out he's a huge Atlanta Falcons fan. I found out he banks with a credit union. He's got good credit. He's retired and he lost his wife. So this conversation, as we're getting to know each other, he's getting to know me as well. So it goes on for about 30 minutes. So I come back and, hey, Robert, what are you planning on using with that capital, the $30,000? He goes, oh, I need $25,000 for a camper. And then I needed some spending money. I go, camper? I go, what do you plan on doing with the camper? He goes, oh, I'm going to go to West Virginia in the New River. Then I'm going to go to Shenandoah Mountains, then in Ohio, or Tennessee and Ohio. Everybody listening and even yourself, when's the last time you guys been camping? Think about that. And so, and I started, when you went camping, where did you go? Just think of yourself right now. Where did you go? Who did you go with? Did you kayak? Did you hike? And then what kind of food did you eat? So as I'm going through that exercise and he's visualizing what his life is like out there camping and spending time because he was going whitewater rafting, then he was going to be in a camp on a camper with a bunch of his friends. So he's starting to visualize in his mind what his life is like. So then I come back to him. I go, Robert, I notice that you've been trying to sell this property for about 2 months, and you open to sell financing. I go, what seems to be the problem? Because everybody's offering me a low down payment on the home, like around much lower, and or a down payment. And I said, Robert, I'm going to be frank with you. Nobody's going to put $30,000 down when they can go get an investor loan and put less capital down and probably rate about the same, but a property a little bit more desirable. But this is what I'll do. You mentioned that you belong with a credit union. You have good credit, or they have great rates. I'll give you $3,500 down. You go ahead and take a loan out for the camper for the $25,000. And what I'll do is on the 20th of every month, we'll automatically have the payment pulled directly out of our account, sent directly to the credit union to make the payments on your behalf. And what we'll do is we'll create a Gmail in that portal. So whenever there's a notice that goes out, it goes to my bookkeeper and it goes to you. So we got that deal for $3,500 down because I listened to him and I built a rapport with him where he said he had other investors. He had probably 12 other offers from other investors that they didn't listen. They just kind of beat him up. So I understood what his problem was and solved it. So whenever I look at a deal, there's two things I always want to know. Why are they selling? And what are they planning on doing with that capital? Because if you can figure that out, that's how you can be creative enough to structure a seller financing deal.
And I think that's so important. Listening is 10 times more important than what you're saying to them. And you're selling the deal to them. And anytime you're selling, you need to be listening a lot more than you're talking, because you need to hear their pain points and pull that out. There's an old story about two kids were fighting over an orange. Little boy and little girl, they needed the orange, and finally they brought it to their mom, and their mom said, "Stop fighting." She took the orange, she just cut in half and handed it each half. And then she saw the little girl peeling off and throw away the orange. And then the little boy peeled it off and ate the orange. And she said, "Wait a minute, you just wanted the orange and you wanted the peeling." So instead, if she had just taken that extra minute and said, "Why do you want, teach one, why do you want it, this orange?" The little girl would have said, "I just need the peeling for shavings on this dessert I'm making." And the little boy would have said, "I just want to eat the orange." And she could have just given one the peeling and one the orange. And I think that's so important, is people need to listen a lot more, and they can solve problems for their sellers as well as their buyers when they do
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
it should be, and it absolutely should be a win for everybody. It should be a win for the seller, a win for your buyer, and then you make a little bit of money along the way. So it's a win for everybody, and you're just using your knowledge to help sophisticate and make it's a win for everybody. I can't tell you how many times. I mean, I remember doing this one deal as a subject to deal, and the lady was 2 months behind. She was facing foreclosure, and I did a 4-year term on it. And when she got paid off at the end, she called me up and she was so happy because her credit score at that time was 804.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing too. A lot of people don't realize that with subject to, that's actually a selling point for you to buy a property subject to the mortgage. You're going to look, I'm going to take it over and your payment's going to be made. Your credit's going to improve compared to what it is right now. We're going to help you out this way. Going back to seller financing, are you seeing a lot of that right now?
I do. Problem that you're having right now in the seller financing world is that the properties, the principal and interest, the PITI, and all the fees, they're not covering the rents. So that's what I'm seeing. Right here in Florida, I was just looking at a deal in Jacksonville where the rents were $700 less than what the new mortgage payment, because the interest rates jumped up, the tax insurance jumped up. So it's kind of it's a weird balance right now. So that's kind of what I'm seeing a little bit out there in the marketplace. But there's different markets. Some markets are doing okay, where the rents are working in favor. So you have to look at your market and see, and how, because usually when I sell a property, I put an end buyer into a property, I try to stay as close as possible to the market rents in that area because you always want to look at worst case scenario. What happens to that property if you have to take it back and you got to put a tenant in there? You don't want to be upside down. And the same thing when I look at people doing Airbnbs, I always tell people make sure when you underwrite, I can't tell you how many times, especially in the Orlando area, people are taking these deals down and underwriting it off of Airbnb numbers and not underwriting it off of long-term rental. And now look at what happened in the Orlando. It's just oversaturated right now.
Yeah. Well, and I think what I'm hearing there is experience. Uh, it sounds like you have experienced probably the Great Recession, 2008 through 2012. What are some of the things that you learned from that time? And what are some things there that you would never do again because you had done them leading up to that?
Knock on wood, I didn't get burned too bad because I learned that around 9/11. During 9/11, we had a kind of an issue back then on a small scale, was nowhere near the big in 2008, but I got a taste of it then, and I felt a little bit of financial pain on a couple of deals, and that's kind of where I learned it. So then going forward, I always learn always. I'm always look. three things I always look at when I'm looking at a deal. Why is the seller selling? What's my exit strategy? Who's my buyer? And then what's my risk? Those are the three things I always look at because you can always take down a seller or financing deal, but is it worth the risk? You know,
Mm.
and that's kind of how I always look at it. I'm always looking at like the angles of where's the risk because when I put somebody in that property as an end buyer, if they stop paying, I step up to the plate and make the payment. So I'm always making sure that I'm always analyzing. In the beginning of my career, I was just putting people in and not looking at it, and we didn't have to really underwrite back then of making sure they could afford it, even though you did do your numbers to make sure. Nowadays, there's consumer protection regulations to make sure they can afford it. So those are the things I always kind of look at when I'm looking at those.
How do you find your values of the properties? What are you looking at to make sure you're not overpaying or going too crazy on a property?
Um, I just look at the comps. Um, Depending on the property and depending on the area, sometimes I will give whatever the value is at that time. Um, if if they want a shorter term, then I need equity in the deal. I tell them. If you want a better price, I need a longer term for that property. I need at least 5 years minimum. I prefer 7 to 10 years because I need its time value and money to make sure that property value is going to come back. But if say they want a 2 or 3 year term and they want top dollar, I'm saying I'm sorry, I need at least 20% equity in that deal, maybe. So that's kind of where I look at, and I look at the area of is this area going to appreciate? How much? What is the average appreciation? I usually do about 3% per year.
Mm.
That's usually what I look for.
Hmm. And so you've looked out over the past few years where it went up much higher than that, but you're probably fine now
Yeah,
where it's not.
yeah, I don't look at that. Even when the market was doing that, I still because you knew it was going to shift at some point. You knew it was unsustainable.
Yeah, yeah. What goes up does come back down to the median. Um, so you've done over $450 million worth of transactions.
It's probably more than that
What?
now.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're much higher than that now. What? How did you scale? How did you do that? What did it take?
It's just over the years I go through stages like in where I want to like okay, let's ramp it up, let's work with a bunch of people, put all the systems in place. Nowadays I tend to I don't want to work as hard. I don't want to grind it that much anymore, if that makes sense. I enjoy it. I keep doing business. But there's a stage there in my life there where, we're grinding it going and, getting working to 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night. Nowadays, I enjoy it and I enjoy my time. Every my mornings now, I sit there and I will meditate, work out. I really don't start working now until 11:30 and to about 5:30. That's usually what my schedule is. And then in wintertime now, on a Friday, I only work for about 2 hours on a Friday because it's beautiful. But there
Yeah.
was times there where, I mean, I was just the whole team, had great managers, and it's just constantly, but I enjoy it. It seems like I don't know. It's just you have hiccups that come along, but it's part of the game, and you just deal with it, and you just move on.
When you were scaling like that, what were some of the biggest pain points you had?
I'm sorry. The biggest what pain?
Pain points.
Getting putting the wrong people in the wrong driver seats. And that pulling the plug quick enough. You give somebody an opportunity to kind of, and it's not going anywhere. You're just kind of prolonging it. That's probably one of the biggest things. Is like you gotta be, quick to hire, quick to fire type of thing. If
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I
But
think
once you get the good team and you have good people, take care of them and just treat them like how you want to be treated. And that's really what it comes down to. Treat your people as your seller. And if you treat them that way, then it's going to prolong and it's going to go slow, roll down to. And just make sure you guys are always doing the right things. Always, always, always do the right things. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we look at a deal and it just didn't make any sense for the seller to sell it to us when they just need a little bit of advice. And if you do that, I mean, you just pay it forward and it always comes back to you.
yeah, I've had a lot of real estate investors over the years that's one of the things they do. They'll go into a house and go, "This house is too nice. You just need to sell it and list it and sell it because you will make much more money." And I think those folks do a lot better in the long run than the ones who go in and try to, no, you get it for much less. Um, so we talked about you started out with sandwich leases, seller financing, you got land trust involved. You got, how do you shift? How do you know when it's like, oh, okay, sandwich leases are going out now, let's get into seller financing. Oh, subject twos are coming back in. How do you know when those are happening?
Well, I think they're all there. It's just you just got to make sure you're doing the correct way in that state because certain states have different regulations. That's one thing. The way I look at it is I listen to the seller. And depending on the seller's needs, I think of a tool belt. A tool belt is each tool is a certain strategy. It could be a subject to, it could be an agreement for deed, it could be innovation, it could be so depending on what the seller's needs are, that will determine on what tool I use. Like if a seller's not financial distress and you go in there and I try to pitch them a subject to, hey, Mr. Seller, keep the mortgage in your name and transfer the deed to me, and they're not financial distress, they're gonna look at you like you're crazy. So you have to go ahead and I won't even bother pitching that. I'll pitch a different type of strategy that they'll understand, like maybe an agreement for deed or land contract, depending on the area what you call it, something on those lines. So you have to kind of understand what's going on with the situation with the seller and what makes sense for the seller and if they have a realtor involved or their attorney to make sure it's a win for everybody.
Now you've got TI Assets. You founded that. Uh,
Mhm.
what unique investment opportunities does that focus on, and what sets it apart from everybody
So
else?
that one is more of the commercial world. I do multifamily. We just closed on a portfolio mobile home park, four parks in South Carolina. And we actually just closed on another one in Virginia. So the TIS, it's just more of the commercial world. And then I have another one that focuses a different entity that focuses on the residential. And then I have another entity that focuses on the coaching. So, when you're in it quite a bit, you have different LLCs for different businesses, if that makes sense, in the real estate game. We all have a lot of them.
Which one do you enjoy the most?
I actually enjoy helping people, believe it or not. Like people, like investors coming in, because a little bit about me. I grew up in Vermont in poverty, and I didn't have any money whatsoever. And I remember at my father left at a young age. I remember I was like 7 or 8 years old, and my mother really had no education. So for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, all we ate for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 3 months straight was Kraft macaroni and cheese out of a box.
Oof.
That's all we ate. So I can't touch that. So I grew up with nothing. And what happened was I had to do odd jobs to help put food on the table. So at 15, I had to go to work at McDonald's. And on top of, growing up in poverty, I had a severe case of ADHD. So I excel in that environment. I was like doing 100 things at once. My mind was going crazy. So I was a senior in high school, worked myself up in high school, and I ended up becoming store manager, managing 170 employees while I was still in high school. And they ended up paying for my schooling, and that's where I really learned the business world of understanding. However, at that age, I didn't respect the dollar, but I understood how to the people skills. I understood how to look at things to make things work smoothly, and and then I just learned. I did the Carlton Sheets thing. I did my first thing, and I just wanted to learn a lot about real estate. And then I discovered how to buy real estate with no money. And I always thought you needed money and credit. I always thought you needed that to kind of get going in the business. And then once I discovered you could do this, I want to help people that are stuck or they came from a situation where they feel that they can't go anywhere. And that's really what I enjoy.
Oh, okay. Uh, how do people, if they want to start, have you as their mentor, how do they get into that?
Sure. You can go to my website. It's Mark Mark, the minus sign Monroe, Monroe, Mark Monroe. And there you have all the links. Or you can just Google me, Mark Monroe Real Estate, and you'll see all my information come up. And you can always follow me and reach out through the channels that way. But yeah, and then I'd love to like connect with you a little bit more, Joe, and then talk a little bit because I really I geek out a lot of times on when we talk, when we get into like learning how to do these deals creatively. but also make sure you're doing them properly with regulations. And I just enjoy that. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's a high, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Because you can kind of like, oh wow, you can do it this way and that way, and just make it a win for everybody.
Yeah, and it's I mean that's where I really step in a lot of times. You know, somebody calls me, and I had one the other a few months ago that it was out of California, and they were using a self-directed IRA plus their own money to help fund this purchase, but it was a reverse 1031 exchange and all this other stuff. And I'm sitting there going, "Wow, okay, yeah,
It's fun.
this you definitely need me."
It's fun,
uh,
isn't it?
yeah, it's definitely complicated. I think we ended up, though, unfortunately, just the way it was structured, there was just no way they could ever do what they wanted to do. They were wanting to use a land trust a Florida land trust in California to do it, and I was like, well, we can set that up to make that happen, but I can't be your trustee. We'll have someone else be your trustee, a resident of California. I said, but then I know I'm not a California lawyer, but boy, I know that California's got something about trusts and taxes, and they don't like it, and they will stick it to you. So we ended up having to send them off again, other professionals locally in California to talk to because the tax code in California for state taxes in California is just another world. And they ended up, they just couldn't make that deal work. There was just no way.
Yeah.
But at least they found it out before they went in and invested all this money and did it, and then completely destroyed their IRA, and then faced penalties and interest and everything on doing that.
And we've seen it before. People go down these rabbit holes and don't investigate properly. And I can't tell you, in all my years, the number one thing is you have to have great people on your team. A really, really good attorney, not just title, but a really good attorney and a really good finance guy that you work with. I highly recommend those two things. You need those because they will keep you out of trouble and make sure they definitely know what they're doing in their experience. You have It's the number one thing because otherwise you can go down this, like you just mentioned, you go down this path and you can spend so much money and then come to find out, oh, I'm sorry, you have to start all over again.
Well, and I talk to so many people who come to me. I was just on a meeting right before we got here today, and I was like, I'm so tired of getting that call twice a week now, on average, of people saying, "Boy, I really wish I had found you before I went to this attorney in Miami or this lawyer in Jacksonville or wherever they went, who charged me $20,000, and they've set it up, and it's completely wrong, and my name is everywhere. There's no privacy, no asset protection, nothing worked the way it was supposed to work because they didn't know what they were doing." And that, it drives me crazy. I'm like, well, if you just found me first, it would have made
Well,
everybody lives much
it's
easier.
sad. Well,
Yeah.
it's crazy because in the same thing in the seller financing world, you have these people out there that are just genius at marketing that knows a little bit about something, but they don't know the whole topic, and people are just gravitating, thinking they're the master. But there's a lot of times they don't know what they don't know because but they're such huge influencers
Right.
where you have to kind of take a step back. And if you see somebody that big as an influencer, just be very cautious of it and like really find out how long they've been in business and really dig deeper because what I found is the people that are not huge influencers that have been in the business longer, they're a lot more knowledgeable than just what an influencer that's really good at marketing. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. No, I was just talking about this in the last meeting too, because I was at a summit of 3,000 lawyers in Atlanta a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things that one of the speakers talked about, he said, look, there are lawyers out there who are not as good as you, but they're better marketers. So they are taking business from you, even though they are not as good as you, and vice versa. There are lawyers out there who are much better than you, who you are taking business away from them simply because they're not good at marketing. So why not be that great lawyer, great entrepreneur, great whatever you are, coach, mentor, whatever you are, and marry that with marketing that gets you out there in front of everybody. And two, yes, not only take what an influencer has said with a grain of salt, look behind, look at their experience, and look at where they are. I do this all the time. I hear lawyers talking all from all over the country, and never ever do this with a land trust, never ever do this with an LLC. And I'm going, and in Utah, that may be absolutely correct, but in Florida, that's 100% wrong. And it drives me crazy because they've just got, this better marketing than I may have at the time. So I have to, answer it on my social media and get out there and try to get ahead of it to do that. Now you've got a podcast too, and probably like me, I mean, you talk to a lot of different people. And one of the things I see are themes that sort of run through. What is a theme that you have seen run through all your podcasts of all these different people, some themes that you've seen common to a lot of folks that you've talked to over the years,
A theme.
or
That's a
challenges
good
that they're
question.
all
What's
facing,
that?
or challenges that they're all facing?
Um, the challenge is, it seems like a lot of times it's capital. They're always trying to, they always need capital to be able to do more deals. That seems like one of the challenges. Um, that's probably, or people don't know about them, and they know something really good, and they're not, people, like I said, never heard about it. I've been on some, I've had some guests on, I'm like, oh wow, that's great. I mean, there's some really super intelligent people out there that you can learn so much from, just as us bringing them on as our show. Like, wow, that's great. And you just like, you gravitate, towards those individuals because you want to be around people. We always talk about, hey, let's be around like-minded individuals. But I also, for me, it's not just that type of mindset. For me, it's also like perspective, how they
Mhm.
will look at something. I like that as well. How are they looking at that, and why they're looking at it, and just analyzing and how they're saying it. I'm like, wow, that's fascinating, because you want those people. I don't know. I'm gravitated towards really intelligent people that get how to do certain things in the real estate world versus just pushing numbers and doing volume. Does that kind of make sense?
Oh yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and sort of to that point, one of the things I've noticed among the more successful people that I've talked to through the podcast over the just this past year, you mentioned meditating. That seems to be a theme throughout. The most successful ones, all meditate. They all, or they journal, or they are, they study stoicism, or they're doing something always to keep their mind clear and to grow at the same time. And those that seems to be a central theme that I see among the more successful people that I talk to out there.
Yeah. And
So,
time. They don't have enough time in a day. That seems to be the other one.
yeah, yeah. Well, and truly successful people who true visionaries who are always coming up with ideas. Yeah, you never have enough time in the day to ever get everything done that your brain's coming up with all the time. I
I
see
don't know
that.
we all talk about this. I don't know how Elon Musk does it. You know what I mean? That guy
Well,
is like, I don't think he sleeps at all. He has
and
like 2 days in one day.
yeah, and he's a real micromanager too. I couldn't do the way he works. I mean, he talks about, oh yeah, I slept on the floor and watched how they did this to on the assembly line so I could tweak this little process. And I'm like, I would never do that because I hire people who will who should figure
Well,
that out, you know?
Well, did you hear about the thing when he took over Twitter? They had three like server firms, and he was flying back home on Christmas Eve from San Francisco, going back home. I think it was where Texas. I don't remember where it was, and he had his two cousins, and they talked about like, hey, why don't we just, what to do, because they're saying, oh, it's going to take 6 months to shut this server firm down. He goes, no, you have to do it in 6 weeks. And then towards the end, he goes, no, you got to do it in 6 days. And they're all looking at him like, there's no way. So him and his two cousins turned the plane around, went to the server farm in Sacramento, and with his bodyguards, they went in there and ripped on the Christmas Eve, took all the servers completely right out themselves, used a U-Haul truck on Christmas Eve, and that's what they did. And that's how fast he gets stuff done. He just rolls his arms up and just like, and people are like, you can't do it. Sure, they had some issues there for a few days, but the servers end up working themselves out. But it's just, I don't know how he does it and just gets stuff done immediately.
Well, and I think I mean, that entrepreneurial mindset is just do it, get it done, because done is better than perfect, number one. That's and take the risk. They're willing to take the risk. I mean, whether it's J.D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, Thomas Edison, Tesla, whoever it was who took that risk, they were willing to bet it all. Just to
Mhm.
see. It's like, well, I'll risk it and see what happens.
Yeah.
Uh, it's crazy. It's just
And I
crazy.
think the other number one thing that really stood out from when I was coming up is the really successful people, especially the ones that have multi-million dollars, is when they want something done, they get it done immediately. They don't procrastinate. Oh, I'll do it next week or this. I mean, it's done. Like the time that they even think about putting it off, they've already completed that task and moved on. That's one of the biggest things that I've seen being around people. Like I remember twice, really good friends of mine, spent some time with them, like being at their home for like, several weeks. And I just watched how they got stuff done, boom, boom. And then another one that I known they're really successful in the commercial real estate and just how fast they get things done. They don't waste any time whatsoever. They don't put anything off. It's just done.
Yeah, one of the things I used to do is called toleration audits. And if I got stuck one day or if I was just bored, I would sit down, just write down as many things as I could think of that I was tolerating. Oh, my windshield wipers are leaving a streak on my windshield every time that it rains. The uh, garage door is squeaking every time it goes up. And I just keep a list of them. And then if I had a day where I just felt like I wasn't getting anything done, I go to that list. I go, okay, what is something I'm tolerating? I'm going to go fix this right now. I'm going to get new windshield wipers put on this car right now. We're going to take care of it. And then it just
Wow.
starts this ball rolling that day. And over time, I, I don't have a list anymore because I don't tolerate things anymore. It's just, you just get to the point where you're like, oh, that's squeaking. We're going to go buy a new one today. We're going to stop this now. I'm not putting up with that. And I think that does it. So if you're not putting up with little stuff, the big stuff comes along. You're like, yeah, we're just going to get this done,
Yeah.
and your staff can go crazy. They're like, you just keep coming up with more stuff, and you keep pushing so hard. And I go, yes, but we chip away at it every week, every quarter, every year. We just keep chipping away at it, and they come back at me sometimes and goes, okay, that's a great idea. I know you want to get this done right now. What are we not going to get done because you want to get this done right now? Because we either don't have time, we don't have people, or we just don't know where to even begin to get this done. I go, okay, some of those we can make. Let's make that next quarter, and I'll keep rummaging around in my head and playing with it on the internet for a few weeks until I figure it out, so that when we talk about it next time, I'm going to have all your answers, and we're going to get this thing done.
Well,
ASAP.
well, look at yourself. I mean, where are you right now?
I'm in
What
Asheville right
house
now.
are you in?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So, I mean, it just shows like where you're at and if you stick to it, what you can achieve and enjoy yourself. I mean, you're in a beautiful home up in North Carolina right now, enjoying the holidays instead of being down in South. So the results speak for themselves.
Yeah, and you're always trying to get. That's one of the things I try to get to, where I work on my terms where I want to work, and we've set up the technology and the processes and the people in place to where we're able to do. And it's not just me; it's anybody in our firm now is almost at that point where they can all be anywhere and work from anywhere when they are able to do it. So, look into the future. What are some emerging trends, opportunities? We're here at the end of 2024, coming into 2025, new administrations, new financial outlook, new tax changes. What are some trends that you think we're probably going to see in 2025 when it comes to real estate investing?
I think it's probably going to stay the same as it this year. My opinion. I don't think the rates are going to come down as people really thought they would be that quickly.
Yeah.
Even with this previous administration, they kept saying the rates are going to come down. I still don't see it coming down. I mean, there's just the inflation levels are still there. Um, we're going to have to go. I mean, I don't want to get political, but our country went through some pretty hard times in the last few years financially on everybody. And I think at some point with this credit card debt and people like living over the means right now, I think we're going to feel a little bit of hard times a little bit for a little bit um, before things get better. That's how I think I see it. I could be wrong. But from the seller financing world, I like this. This is great opportunities. People that can't sell their homes or, there's not a lot of equity. Now, yes, there is a lot of properties that do have equity, but the sellers are starting to come being realistic. And I do see, and I don't know, I could be wrong about this, but I see Florida and Texas a lot of inventory coming online. So I'm
Mhm.
curious how that's going to play out. Because the during the 4 years after COVID, everybody was flocking to Florida, Texas, and all that. And even the builders been building like crazy. But now I see a really short, like if you look at like some of the areas that didn't do well, like Boston, San Diego, those areas, there's still such housing demand in those areas. I see the prices still kind of going up in those markets, where I think Florida, I don't know what's going to happen. Florida, we have a couple headstorms. We have the insurance that's kind of taken away, and I do see some inventory coming online. But I still see people love moving to Florida, so hopefully it's not going to be hit like we did last time. But that was a whole different animal.
Yeah, I think Florida, you're probably going to see a lot of money spent on people hardening their homes, better windows, better roof, just preparing, for more floods, higher winds. I mean, we got hit this year. Two really good hurricanes hit us pretty good, and I do see a lot of opportunity there for people who are in the home hardening business, and you're going to have to get your insurance down. Otherwise, your insurance is just going to
Yeah.
make it too expensive to live there. Taxes, real property taxes, I see those leveling off because values are leveling off.
Hmm.
We had that big run up there for a couple of years, but I agree. I think things are going to calm down a lot on values, so that's going to keep the taxes pretty level. And once people get used to those tax bills, I think that will help them. But it will take some time for the rents and everything to get up
Yeah.
to support those higher taxes and higher insurance payments. And that's what I'm hearing from a lot of my multifamily folks is people just can't make deals work simply because the insurance is so expensive on multifamily. They just they're backing out of deals left and right as far as building new multifamily or buying existing multifamily. They're like, I can't make this work with the insurance. I'm going to have to be paying every year on this property or the reserves. And I'm going to have to set aside for improvements that the lender's going to make me do over the next 2 years to harden it to get the insurance down. I can't afford to make this deal work. So we're seeing that a lot on the multifamily side as well.
Yeah.
So something's going to have to change there as well. Maybe the government giving more incentives again for hardening, new windows, new doors, new roofs, lifting up things off the ground for flooding, those kinds of things, and preventing
Well,
flooding.
yeah, I'm on the water, and I have to, over the next 3 to 5 years, I have to raise our seawall by 16 inches
Yeah.
because of,
And that's the thing I'm seeing in a lot of condos on the beach. These big condo projects, they have seawalls, same thing. And you've got a 150-foot long seawall that now you have to raise that. And it's already been hit by two hurricanes in the past 2 years, and it's already pretty well damaged. These large condominiums are also having trouble with that. Plus, just the condo laws that had to change after Sunset Tower. I mean, that's been a big game changer in the state of Florida when it comes to condominiums. So yeah, I think it's going to be tough in Florida for the next year or two. But I think if we can get insurance under
yeah.
control, things will start settling back down. And yeah, people want to move to Florida still
And they
to
do.
this day.
I actually think at some point the condo market, because of what we're going through, if you start buying it at the right time, I think you could really come out really well because the condo community is starting. They've been feeling the pain for the last 2 years,
Yeah,
and I think maybe in the next 6 months to a year, I think it'd be huge opportunities because a lot of these condos will be fully reserves because that's one of the biggest things, and they're getting hit with those special assessments and everything. But I do
yeah,
think at some point, like you said, it's going to level off, and I think there's some good opportunities in there. The good old days of grandma coming to Florida to retire in a condo. I think those days are gone.
yeah.
Unless you're in a Century Village or the Villages or something like those. But because of that, it's just become expensive.
Well, and part of too another opportunity that we see, especially up here in North Carolina, and probably along the west coast of Florida now with these hurricanes that came through. We saw this in 2004 in Central Florida when we got hit by four hurricanes in 4 weeks. Suddenly you have a lot of damaged properties and people go, I'm just not going to rebuild. I don't want to deal with it, whatever. And you can get properties, rock bottom. You bring them up to new code, you can sit on them for a year or two and then resell them for multiples of what you paid for it, because the land's just not there, and anymore, other than
Yeah.
what you bought
And,
on it.
and one of the things that I really notice, I'm sure you probably see this, if you look at a community that's been hit with a hurricane, look at it 3 to 5 years later. So much money's gone into that community, and that community's thriving because you have insurance, you have federal government. There's so much. Look at what happened in Daytona Beach in Ormond Beach area a couple of years ago. They got so much money that came in there. They're building this huge Marriott there. All those. I mean, it's just crazy what's happening. And no matter where it happens, if you watch a community where a hurricane came through, look at it 3 to 5 years later. It's just exploded.
Yeah, and we're going to see that up here in Western North Carolina, where I am right now. It's This hurricane came through and it was devastating. I mean, it devastated an area the size of the state of Massachusetts. It just flooded, and you see, as you're driving down the interstate, you look over and you just see these massive boulders that the water moved these boulders, and they're spread over fields that had never seen water, for 100 years, and now they've got boulders just strewn across them as a riverbed, because they had become a riverbed for a day or two. And you look at that and you're like, okay, yeah, this was a lot of destruction. And then, yeah, you see all the federal money and all the insurance money coming in. And then you see a lot of investors coming in and buying up these lots near the water and everything, because they know you're probably not going to get hit with another hurricane for another 10 to 20 years. So at least for 10 to 20 years, we can get this, build on it, and do well, and harden it, make it higher, harder to withstand future storms like this, because
Absolutely.
we're
Yep.
not going to have
That
we're not
is
going to have
huge.
more. Yeah, we won't have more storms, but the storms that are coming are more intense, and I
Yes.
think that's what people are learning. It's like we're not necessarily having more storms, we're just having stronger storms, whether it's blizzards or droughts or hurricanes, or tornadoes. They're just stronger. They're stronger.
Well, my buddy just bought in Fort Myers, and then 3 weeks later, the first storm came through. He had a foot and a half in water, right? And then the next one, um, he had 3 feet of water. So what he did now is all the downstairs, because it's 2 levels. He is just making all the walls concrete. So if it
Yeah.
comes again, he just gets the power spray and just power sprays it all out. He doesn't have to worry about ripping out. Doesn't have to worry about the mold. So he's like,
Yeah.
hey, I don't care if another one comes. I just, if it's coming, I just move my stuff upstairs and just get my power spray hose. That's
Yep.
all he's doing now.
Yep. I think that's kind of hardening we'll start seeing, especially out near the coast. Of course, even in Orlando, I'm looking at replacing all the windows on the back of my house with uh, uh, at least Category 3 windows now in Orlando, and that's going to be, I got prices. It's going to be over $100,000 just to replace all the windows and sliding glass doors on the back of the house. I'm like, ugh, that's $100,000. Dang. Uh, and then a generator, you start looking at generators, you start looking at adding Starlink as a backup internet access to the house, and things like that, because it's like, well, if we lose power, you lose water, you lose this, you lose that, you gotta have some backups for it
You have
now.
to be self-sustained.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. It's just like, all right, let's be self-sustaining. Like that's, I mean, you really need. But I have friends like in Ormond Beach. I have these guys that live in this beautiful area, and he lives in the old airs of J.C. Penney, the home, and it is on one of those areas, and they're going naked, up there with no insurance, and
Yeah.
their insurance is $27,000 a year, and they did have some damage, but the damage was only like 20,000 dollars. So, and he hasn't had insurance in the last 4 years, so he's still coming out ahead at the moment.
Yeah, I had a client who he had 47 homes in Florida, and it had just gotten too expensive to insure him. So he decided to go naked on all of them. No insurance on any of the houses. The very next week, one of the houses burned to the ground. He said, okay, well, maybe that wasn't the best decision I ever made. But he looked at it, and I think that was the first and last thing that he had happen. And since then, he's been fine, just self-insuring, setting money aside to rebuild some of them or repair them as time went on. So yeah, I think you are going to start seeing that, especially in areas like Florida, where people just go, I own it straight out cash. I don't. I'm not worried about interest rates. I'm not worried about the taxes because I can afford those, and I'm not even worried about insurance because I can just rebuild it if it gets destroyed. I'll just rebuild the house if I need to.
Yep, that's kind of
So yeah,
exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
One of the things I always do with all my guests is when we get to the end, our mission is to help people aspire to a better life. So one of the questions, the last question I always ask my guests is, who has helped you aspire to a better life?
Wow. That list could go on. Depends on my journey. Um, I would probably say my grandfather, you
Okay.
know, because, my father left, and he lived next door and he had a small business and I kind of looked up to him. For years and years, I never really realized that until probably when I wrote the book. And that was one of the questions I was going through. I'm like, wow, my grandfather was probably the one that really inspired me the most as being an ethical person, who I am, that made me humble, and making sure you always do the things are the right things. And just treat people the way you want to be treated. I think that's probably, but the list could go on and on because throughout the years and different lives, I've always looked up to people and I've always had mentors. Even today, you have a mentor, you outgrow your mentor and then move on and always still be friends with that mentor.
Well, that's wonderful. That's great to hear. Everybody, Mark Monroe, mark-monroe.com is the best way to get in touch with him. We'll put everything down in the show notes for his book and everything else. Mark, I want to thank you again for coming on Trust This today. And until next time, everybody, trust this.
Thank you, Joe. Bye bye.
Thanks for listening to this edition of Trust This. If you got something out of it, please press like and subscribe and give us a 5-star review to help us reach others who can benefit from this series. Until next time, keep aspiring to a better life.